Hi guys, welcome back to Infinite Possibilities, the podcast where we explore the lives of amazing people, their choices, challenges and opportunities. And today I have a very special guest, Lara.
Thanks so much for having me, Karen. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Me too, and thanks so much for being here as well.
My pleasure.
So Lara, you've had like a pretty amazing career. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience, like what you did before and what you're doing now?
Sure, I can do that. So currently I'm working at KPMG with Karen. That's actually how we met. And I'm working in the Human Resources Advisory team in consulting. But prior to that, I was studying in the United States and I went over there on a diving scholarship. So previously was an elite 10-metre platform diver.
Amazing! And you achieved so much success in your diving. Want to tell the audience?
Sure. So I started diving when I was quite young. I was about 10 years old when I first started, and prior to that was doing gymnastics and trampolining, so very much into aerial sports. And I sort of ended up training quite a lot and competing for Australia at a number of different events. So I competed at World Championships, World Cup, Commonwealth Games, World Series, and I ended up coming fourth in the Commonwealth Games, and I was also a world champion for my age in 2014 as well.
Oh, that is so impressive. And you say it so lightly.
Thank you.
World champion! Woo! Yeah, cool. So we really want to know what kind of child you were like growing up. So let's rewind. So tell me more about your childhood. What was your personality like?
I was definitely a very energetic, overactive child. I think that's what led my parents to put me into sport and into gymnastics. It was a really good way to use up some of that energy and direct it into something positive. So definitely very, very energetic as a child. And then I've got two siblings. I have a sister who's 2 years younger than me and then a brother who's 4 years younger than me, so also close with them as well growing up. And my sister actually did gymnastics with me for a number of years, and then I transitioned into trampolining and into diving, and she stuck with gymnastics. So she also has competed for Australia in gymnastics, and she did that at an elite level.
Wow, it runs in the blood. We got to ask about your little brother though.
So he tried a number of different sports, and he was great. He did diving for a little while. He was very good, but I don't think he had found his passion in sport, so he didn't quite pursue it to the same level as we did.
Yeah, that's cool. And it would have been like so much pressure growing up for him to start diving and to have like you guys leading the way in gymnastics and diving.
Possibly. I'd like to think that we
encouraged
and supported versus sort of put pressure, but I think that's always the way when you have people close to you who are doing something at a certain level. You would have those comparisons happen.
Yeah.
So he sort of did his own thing a little bit too. He did some soccer and futsal, so we never did that. So he did a few things that we hadn't done before as well.
Perfect, cool. And tell me more about how you sort of fit in the school environment. So, you know, you were very energetic, so I guess that made you kind of sporty, right, doing gymnastics. What about in terms of studies? Were you enjoying it, or were you like, oh, why am I sitting still for so long, and you want to jump around? Or
Yeah, I always really enjoyed studies. I've always been really interested in pursuing an education. I think I sort of always had those two competing priorities throughout my life, where I was training a lot and obviously had goals in that aspect of my life, but then I also had academic goals that I wanted to achieve, and was quite a dedicated student as well. And at times it was difficult to coordinate those two priorities, because I sort of would get up in the morning, go to training, then go to school, then leave school early to go back to training, and then get home from training and do my homework and my assignments or whatever I might need to do that day. So it was definitely a balancing act and a bit of juggling, but I think I always placed a lot of value in getting an education as well, and was really grateful that I had the chance to get a good education while doing my sport.
yeah, that's awesome, because sometimes people are only good at one or the other, right?
Yeah, I think that's something I definitely learned as well as I got older. I knew that in a sport like diving, you have a bit of a shelf life. There's a lot of potential for injuries and burnout and things like that, where you're not going to be able to be a diver forever. So I think as I got older, was pretty aware that I would need to have something that comes next to me after I'm finished diving. And so for me, a really good path to figure out what that would look like was through education.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool, and tell me more about your personality when you were young. So you were super energetic, were you a bit of a cheeky child, but you were like the oldest sibling, so...
I think I was... Oh, I don't know. I think I'm a bit of an ambivert. I'm a bit of both.
Best of both worlds.
Yeah, I'm definitely a people person. I really enjoy being around people, feel very energized when I get to do that. But I'm certainly not the loudest person in the room or the strongest personality in a lot of situations. So I think I'm a little bit of both in that aspect. Because I was so energetic when I was a kid, I don't know if I was the easiest for my parents. But I think once I got a little bit older, and even once I got into the sport, I think I
calm down.
I think when you have a healthy place to channel your energy, it definitely helps with behaviour and
Yeah, that's awesome. Everyone needs an outlet, especially kids,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I was very lucky. My parents were super supportive and selfless. They had 2 kids who were training plus of 30 hours a week and different sports, and not even the same time. So our start and finish times didn't even align, and we all went to different schools as well. So just the dedication and the support and selflessness from them is 100% what allowed us to then go in and be able to do our sports to the level we wanted to.
That's amazing. Shout out to mum and dad.
Absolutely, yeah. And certainly, very aware that not everyone has the opportunity to do that. So very grateful and very lucky to have had that.
Yeah, that's cool. Let's talk more about starting sports. So when did you start gymnastics, and was it love at first sight?
I think I would have been maybe about 4 or so. I would have been quite young when I started, and I don't know if I immediately loved it, but I think I thought it was fun, and I liked learning new things. I've always liked that. So, in gymnastics or in any aerial sport, it takes a lot of practice to be able to do those skills. So I think I really liked that challenge aspect of it. I liked being able to do something new. And it was also just enjoyable. It was a group environment. You're there with lots of other kids as well, and that's always fun.
Yeah, true. And do you think gymnastics sort of came naturally to you? I guess you require a lot of flexibility, a lot of body coordination? Yeah,
I think... So my sister, she did gymnastics all through her life. She was and still is one of the most naturally talented people I've ever met. She picks things up so quickly, and she's also extremely graceful. So she has this effortless quality about the skills that she would do. So I think she's a really good example of someone who I trained with who did just have that natural talent. I think I had coordination and aerial awareness, which are really helpful, but I probably wasn't quite there in terms of the natural ability and natural elegance that she had. So I was also a really hard worker. I was keen to just get in and practice as much as I needed to get good at something, and I think that's sort of what helped me in my sport that I did.
Yeah, that's cool. And how long did you do gymnastics before you switched to diving?
I would have done gymnastics probably for about 4 or 5 years, but there was an overlap where I was doing gymnastics and trampolining, and then I was just doing trampolining for a little while, and then while I was doing the trampolining started the diving, did both of those for a couple of years, and then eventually when I went into high school I decided to just focus on diving.
Ooh, amazing. And was that a hard decision, to choose between diving and gymnastics?
It was a hard decision because I really enjoyed parts of both, but I think there was a lot of opportunity and potential in diving. I knew that if I continued with it, I was in a really good program with a phenomenal coach and really great teammates, and I knew that if I stuck with that, I might have the chance to, compete for the state or compete for the country one day. And
which you did.
I did. I did get to do that, which was fantastic. So I think I was a little bit aware kind of what the opportunity would be like. And that's not to say that the same opportunities don't exist in other sports. They certainly do. But I think I was at the point where I realised if I just picked one and focused on that, that might help me to achieve some goals.
Yeah, that's cool. And do you think that you were naturally better at diving, so you leaned more towards diving, or?
I think diving and gymnastics differ a little bit in terms of the artistry of the sport, as in gymnastics there are dance elements that are really important, and it's very much about flow and grace, and then diving, I think it's quite perfectionistic in the sense that it's millimeters of difference end up having a huge impact on the result of the dive. And
that's so true.
It felt like something where if I practiced enough and was focused enough, I could get quite good at it, whereas with gymnastics I probably didn't feel that I quite had the same
natural
natural talent and grace and ability as some do.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
But, I also, I think, was just lucky to get identified and put into a really good program. It was called a talent identification program, and that was out of the Sleeman Sports Centre at Chandler, where the AIS for diving was also based. So I was very young, but I was training at the same place and often at the same time as people who were in the Queensland Academy of Sport and the Australian Institute of Sport. So I ended up coming in at that talent identification level and then went on to be part of the QAS and part of the AIS as well. So I sort of moved up through that.
Oh, wow. That's so amazing.
Thank you.
And then how does one get into diving? Surely, parents letting their kids, jump off a 10 metre. Yeah, how does it all begin?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was young when this happened, so I don't know if I remember exactly. I remember my first day going in for a trial, but my mum had said I'd seen diving and had sort of asked her to take me in and said, I want to do it, it looks fun.
Yeah.
And obviously having been in gymnastics, trampolining, I like doing somersaults, so I don't know what would be better than diving for that. So yeah, Mum took me in for just a trial day. It was just a session where I would essentially get to try diving, and if they liked me they'd bring me back, and that ended up happening. They decided to bring me back on a trial basis, and I started training and eventually kept training, and that's kind of how I got into it.
Yeah, that's cool. And do you remember your first dive? What did that feel like?
So it was a really, really slow process when I first started. I was young and
how old were you?
I was 10, and
my
they
gosh.
definitely don't just stick you up on the 10-metre platform and tell you to jump
Thank
up.
goodness.
Agreed. So I started out doing straight jumps, hundreds and hundreds of straight jumps from the 1 metre, from the 3 metre, from the 5 metre, and eventually working my way up. And then I'd move on from jumps and start doing entries, so basically falling into the water and breaking the water with your hands, which is how you'll see most people, they land on their hands in a handstand position when they dive. So learning just how to go into the water and not make a splash. And then you keep building, you do half a somersault, and then you do 1.5 somersaults, 2.5 somersaults, and it was a very slow process over a number of years, just building up to being able to do the dives that you then see people competing internationally.
Yeah, that's awesome. So pretty much you got serious about diving in around high school, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nice. And was this any influence from your parents, or because
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I was very lucky in that my parents never had any kind of expectations of me. They never pushed me to do anything. I was just very passionate and very driven, and I'd found a sport that I thought I could do well at, and they were just extremely supportive and willing to spend a lot of their time and a lot of their energy helping me make my goals happen. So I certainly never felt like pressure or expectation from them, just a lot of support and a lot of selflessness on their part to help me be at the pool at 6 a.m. every day, or come back and pick me up from the pool at 6 o'clock at night when I was finally finished.
And how did you sort of balance it with high school? What was the routine? Were you diving every day or?
So I think I trained about 10 times a week. I would do morning and afternoon, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. I'd do just the afternoon on Wednesday, so that was my sleep-in day. I had the Wednesday morning off, and then I'd do a big, long strength session on Saturday as well, and then I'd have just Saturday afternoon and Sunday off and start all over again on Monday. So, yeah.
So when you say you trained in the afternoon, does that mean so you, in the morning, you were diving and then you went to school and then you went to diving and
again?
And did you go back to school, or because school ends like at 3 p.m. or
so I would typically do about 6 to 8 a.m. in the morning. I would train for diving, and then I would go to school, either get taken by my parents, or once I got my license I would just drive myself, and then I would stay at school until about 2 o'clock or so in the afternoon, and I'd leave school early and go right back to the pool and then train from about 2:30 to 6 p.m. And I wouldn't go back to school after that. I'd just go home, and if I would miss at least one lesson in high school every afternoon, so I'd just have to catch up on that work myself.
Oh, damn, that's a pain.
It was definitely tough to manage, especially if it was important content that we were going over in those afternoons, but I think I was quite lucky. I would try to be as proactive as I could be in terms of letting my teachers know about my diving commitments and about me missing lessons, and where they could, they tried to give me the content ahead of time, or at least point me in the right direction so I could catch up more easily.
That's cool. And how do you sort of deal with motivation? Like, you know, in high school you're pretty young, and then today you don't feel like diving, or how do you sort of manage that or self-regulate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know that I dealt with it too much for most of my younger years. I think for the majority of high school, that was sort of all I'd really known. I was used to training almost every day, and so it just became part of my routine. So I didn't really experience too much of a struggle with motivation when I was younger, and even probably through year 11 or so. Year 12 was a little bit more difficult because I ended up going to the World Cup and the Commonwealth Games back to back. So I was away for a number of weeks, and then I also went to the Junior World Championships in Russia that same year. And prior to that, I'd been like competing either domestically or internationally at selection trials for these competitions, or at World Series or various different events. So I missed quite a lot of school in what is a pretty tough year for most students anyway. So I think that's probably when I first started to feel a bit more burnt out, and like it was a bit harder to juggle all that. I was lucky in that for the most part I was able to get some accommodations around still trying to get all my schoolwork done. For example, I did one less subject. I did I think only 5 subjects instead of 6 in year 11 and 12, which helped. And then I was able to use some like assembly time or PE time to just have a spare so that I could catch up on work versus going and doing more PE when I'd just trained like 5 hours that day. So that was helpful, but it was quite a lot, and I think that was at times a bit difficult to manage, but I ended up doing really well in the diving that year, and also really well in school. So
Wow.
yeah, it was quite good that I was able to juggle that, and I think definitely, you know, a huge credit to my family who supported me through doing all that, and then also the teachers who did make an effort where they could to be accommodating.
Yeah, that's cool. And what do you sort of like when you're struggling? What's your self-talk like? Are you like, oh, you know, this will be over, you know, once I finished it, then I'll be fine? Or what is your sort of internal dialogue, if you have any?
That's a good question. It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put myself in the mindset that I would have been in back then. I think back then it probably would have been along the lines of that I had, you know, worked really hard to get up to that point, and I only had, you know, a term or so to go of school, and you know, all I had to do was try the best that I could. I didn't have to meet any kind of standard or expectation. I think there's a big difference for me between like trying your best and doing your best, in the sense that doing your best is like you're always performing at peak, you're always doing and exceeding like standards and expectations, and that's not realistic. You're not always going to be achieving your very best every day, but what you can do is try your best and know that you've done what you can for where you are and how you're feeling on that day.
Yeah, that's pretty good self-talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and how do your sort of friends feel at that time? Wow, they have like a famous friend. What was that sort of school attention like?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think because diving wasn't really a school sport, people didn't necessarily know what I was up to.
Like that's true.
Yeah, they knew I trained a lot, but I think, you know, I was competing for Australia in diving from a very young age, and people didn't necessarily know that until when I started being in like competitions like the Commonwealth Games, when they saw me on TV and went, oh, I go to school with her.
Yeah.
So I probably was competing at that high level for a little while before people realised what I was doing, just because there's not really any reason why they would know in a high school context. But I had some really nice friends in the school, and people were supportive generally.
Yeah, that's cool. Did people ask you for your autograph or anything?
Definitely not.
Is it too late now?
You're so kind.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. And then tell me about the sort of decision to go to the States for study.
Yeah, so I was competing for Australia when I was a teenager, when I was in high school. So there were a number of competitions that I would go to, and there would be coaches for Team USA who were also college coaches. So I think before me there had been a number of former teammates who had gone over to the US and had been able to, you know, get a full scholarship and be able to do all their university and keep up with the diving. So it was always on my radar, but I also had ended up meeting a couple of college coaches just through that, and I could see, you know, they were producing really high-level athletes through the college system as well. And it just seemed like a really good opportunity also to try to achieve a bit more balance in my life. I
don't know if that's balance.
Well, I was really conscious of not wanting to only have one thing going on, as in not just focusing on the diving, because I found when I did that and then I got injured, or maybe I didn't compete as well as I would have liked, it was really, really hard. It kind of felt like I didn't really have anything at that point. So I was really quite keen to have sort of more than one focus area in my life, and to feel like I wasn't just defined by how well I had done at a competition or whether I'd made a team. That's a bit of a dangerous place to be, just with your own self-identity, I think. So I think college was a good option for me, just in that I knew here, like training here, it was quite rare to see someone who was able to study full-time at university and do the diving, so there was always going to be that sort of natural focus placed on that. And I think I was I was very burnt out, I would say, after what was a pretty huge effort getting through like high school and all the competitions. And I think it was also good to have a change of environment and a change of pace at that time.
Yeah, that's cool. And so when you landed in the US, what was it like? Like, you know, you're free from your parents.
Well, I was lucky because my dad actually, he flew over and dropped me off when I first went over there and helped me move in. So that was really nice. But it was quite different. I had gone on a recruiting trip to visit the college I ended up going to before I committed to them. So I'd seen the campus, I'd met the coach, I'd seen the pool was beautiful, so I knew it was going to be a really nice place to be, like a nice place to train, good equipment, good facilities, good academically as well, which was great. So I'd seen the campus before, but I moved into a dorm, which was interesting. So I lived in a dorm my first year, and then after that I moved into on-campus housing. Well, I was like a house with teammates from diving. So when I first started, I think I was just keen to explore, like get my bearings, know where things were, figure out what my routine would be like over there. And it ended up being fairly similar to high school in the sense that we would typically train twice a day, usually morning and afternoon, and we would also do the like strength and weights training that I'd done back home. And then between that, I would just be, versus going to school all day, I'd be scheduling in my classes and fitting them in where I could between the diving.
Yeah, a lot more like pick and choose and flexibility.
It was a bit, it was. Sometimes it was difficult. When you first start college, it's not too bad because you have like quite a lot of options for what courses you can take. But once you get later in your degree, and that happens here too, you have less options. You sort of have classes that you need to do to move on to the next. Maybe they're a prerequisite, or they're a class you have to do to graduate. So it does get a little bit harder to coordinate once you get closer to the tail end of your studies. But for the most part, it was fairly flexible. There were some semesters where I had a class that ran over training time and I would just come in late and leave late if that happened.
Yeah, that's cool. And then tell me more about burnout. So pretty much, would you say like the hardest you've ever worked would probably be that high school period, or was university, college even more like, I guess, more intense for you?
That's a good question. I think they were probably very similar in terms of managing the workload, but they were hard for different reasons. In high school, I would say at probably peak diving performance, I was training a lot, and I didn't have a lot of freedom during the days because I was in school all day. So all my days were kind of booked from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then I'd still have homework and assignments after that.
And then your friends are like, I want to meet up with you, Lara. You're like, sorry, see you at the pool.
I wasn't able to be as social as I would have liked, but I think I had my goals and I knew what I wanted to do, and I was willing to give up that aspect if it meant I might be able to do some of the things I was hoping to, and travel and meet people and see the world a little bit where I could. But in college, another layer was that I was away from my family, who I was always very close with, which was quite hard at times, and obviously big time difference as well, 14 or 15 hours. So I couldn't just, always get in contact with them either, because it might be the middle of the night there. And then also the diving was still difficult. We still trained a lot and it was a very high level of competition there also. But on top of that, I was a full-time university student and I took my studies very seriously, and worked really hard to do well and to get into an honours program, and I actually ended up doing my bachelor's degree and my master's degree back to back.
Oh my gosh.
So there was a year in there where I was still finishing off my honours undergraduate but had started full-time as a master's candidate. So at that point I was doing full-time master's level coursework, additional honours undergraduate classes, and then all the diving on top of that as well.
Crazy.
So that was a lot, I think, to juggle at times also.
Yeah, wow. And also, was there this expectation for you when you went to from Australia to the US, this high expectation, because you accomplished so much in high school? Was that sort of hard to deal with, or not really?
Well, I wanted to do well, to do right by the coach who had given me this great opportunity. So I think some pressure I put on myself because I just wanted to sort of basically warrant my scholarship that I'd earned. And then I didn't feel it much from like teammates, I think, just because they weren't, like, they didn't necessarily know me or know my background or know that I'd competed for Australia prior to, so I don't think they really had any sort of preconceived notions about what I'd come in and be able to do.
Yeah, and was there times where like maybe you weren't performing so well, and then how, like, because I've heard like horror stories about coaches, you know, trying to cut scholarships, and did you have any sort of like kind of experience with similar things?
I found over there, so here in Australia when I was diving, we really didn't ever have time off. We probably had 10 days at Christmas, and maybe sometimes if we had a big season we'd have a week or a couple of weeks, but we were really just training year round. But if we were really, really sick or really injured, we'd have good medical staff who would be able to say, like, they can't be in the water, they need to just do dry land, or they can't do 10 metre because they're injured, so they need to just do like 1 metre or 3 metre diving. So a lot of accommodations were made where they needed to be to kind of take care of yourself and your body. Over in college, I definitely felt that there was an expectation that if you physically could dive, you would.
Yeah.
So there were times when I competed at our conference championship while I had the flu and I was having fevers and diving off a 10 metre platform, or I had like a stress injury in my foot and was in a boot. So I was in a boot for walking around, but I'd take the boot off to get in the pool and to dive. So I think that was a little bit different in that I felt like
you had to.
I just felt like I had that expectation for myself to do what I was there to do.
Yeah, wow. And tell me more about the injuries, because when you told me last time, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's not a very friendly sport on your body.
Yeah.
Neither is gymnastics, neither are many. I don't know if any sport at that level is good for you. It's good for you because you build up strength and hopefully you enjoy doing it, but overuse injuries start to get so common when you're training and competing that much. So I definitely have had all sorts of injuries, stress fractures in my feet. I've had hip injuries, back injuries, neck injuries, torn triceps, torn abs, torn adductors, just about everything you could probably think of I might have done. And yeah, I think you do, as you get older and as you get more injuries, you end up spending quite a lot of time just trying to take care of yourself, and you're proactive where you can, you know, strengthening areas that you know are a little bit weaker and that you're more likely to get injuries in, but you also have to do a lot of that retroactive injury management, a lot of physio, a lot of massage, a lot of icing, just to try to keep yourself in one piece.
Yeah, and what do you think was the most common injury for you? Was it mainly the wrists when you land, or was it the feet more?
I had a lot of triceps tears in both arms.
From
So
which part?
if you land on the water and your arms aren't fully extended, for example, if you don't quite finish your dive in time, maybe you didn't jump high enough, you didn't spin fast enough, you didn't kick out at the right time, or you didn't know where you were in the air. If something goes wrong, you might hit the water and your arms won't be fully extended, and that puts a lot of pressure on the muscles in your arms. So I had quite a lot of injuries there, and it's not very nice when you get hurt in those areas, because then when you try to dive again, you're not strong enough to keep your arms straight, so you end up hitting your arm collapses and you end up hitting yourself in the head. So I've had times when I've had like bruises on my head from that happening. So that was a common one for me. And then I think just any kind of muscle strain is pretty easy to do. A lot of flexibility required in diving and a lot of repetitive motion. So it's a good way to get injured.
Oh, doesn't sound promising.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also heard that you had concussions as well.
I did, yeah. I had a number of concussions. It is definitely a contact sport with the water, I would say. So, if you don't land correctly, maybe you land on your back and you're breaking the water with your head, for example, you can definitely rattle yourself. So I had some quite severe concussions when I was in college, and one of them, the more recent one, I was having pretty bad migraines as a result. So, even after I'd been pulled out of the water and wasn't in the pool and wasn't diving for a considerable period, I was still getting these really awful headaches and struggling with light sensitivity and with concentration. So definitely not a nice injury to have, but unfortunately it is a really common injury for diving and probably a lot of other sports too. And I think when I first started, when I was really young, the education wasn't there around it. So there would have been a number of instances when I'm sure I would have been concussed, but we just didn't know to watch out for it. We didn't know the signs, the symptoms. So I suppose one thing they did do really, really well in college in terms of looking after their athletes was they did good baseline testing and they had good precautions for if they had suspicion that you were concussed.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. So how do you know if you concussed, so meaning that you sort of blacked out but you didn't know?
So a lot of things will show with issues with recall or mental acuity. So they will do these baseline tests where they're checking how well you can remember a series of words or reciting the months backwards, and then also it can affect your balance as well. So they'll do tests to check that, and then that serves as a baseline. So then if you have an incident, if you don't land right or you're not feeling good or you're feeling dizzy after a dive and there's suspicion that you might be concussed, they can then go in and redo those tests, and obviously if your results aren't as good as your baseline, then they would have reason to suspect you might be concussed.
Oh, wow, new word for me.
Yeah.
Would you say that in college you got a lot more injuries than opposed to high school?
I don't think so. I think I was pretty chronically injured throughout. Probably from when I was about 12 or 13, the injuries started popping up, and they were, I was probably almost always dealing with either really sore muscles, like delayed onset muscle soreness, some form of injury, whether it was minor or more severe, or some form of illness. I think because I was working quite hard and it was easy to get sick as well, so just little colds or things like that. In college, I would say similar frequency of injuries, but I think the older I got, the longer it started taking to recover. So I'd find myself with a minor muscular injury that would take weeks to get better, or I'd get sick. I remember I had bronchitis once and it was weeks and weeks before I would get better. So I think I don't think that my frequency of injury necessarily probably increased, but I think how long it took me to bounce back probably did.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, wow. And then so what about sort of the highlights in your diving? Do you have any favourite moments that you can remember?
That's a good question. I think there were a lot of good moments. There was a lot of a lot of hard work and a lot of time and effort and sacrifice from the people around me to get me to those high points. So I was always very aware when I did achieve something. It wasn't just for me, it was also for all those people who'd helped me and supported me and made it possible for me to get there. So I think, I always felt really proud when I was competing for Australia. I always really enjoyed that and was very grateful for that opportunity. My parents were able to come over to Scotland to watch me at the Commonwealth Games, which I absolutely loved. It was so wonderful having them there, and I felt really proud that I was competing at that level. And then when I won the World Championships in my age group, that was a really special moment as well. It was just, I think, the end of a really long, difficult season full of really big highs and lows, and it was a really special moment as well.
Yeah, and do you think overall, do you think it was worth it? Like all those injuries and all that hard work and everything you had to sacrifice?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a bit tough to answer because you don't necessarily know that those things will happen when you go into it. I know when I first started diving, I wasn't, imagining myself in college with a concussion and migraines. I was doing it because I liked it and it was fun and I was getting better at it. And I had the opportunity to do it. So I don't know. I don't know if I can answer if it was worth it. I think the opportunities I had to travel overseas and visit places that I hadn't been before, to live in a different country for 5 years and to get a bachelor's degree and a master's degree and meet new people, that was all really fantastic and definitely something I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't done the diving. So for those parts, I'd 100% say worth it, but I also think certainly it's not all easy and not all highs. There are also some tough parts. You do struggle with getting hurt a lot and being in pain a lot, and sometimes you get injuries. I've been quite lucky, but you'll see athletes get injuries that will stay with them even after they retire and for a really long time, which would be extremely difficult. I think you also can get quite burnt out, and then some of those identity aspects that we've chatted about, you become very wrapped up in the fact that you are an athlete or you are a diver, and it can be a little bit hard whenever you do stop the sport, or even if you're still doing the sport and maybe not performing quite to the level you had previously. It gets a little bit hard to figure out kind of who you are outside of that.
Yeah,
and
you've done it your whole life.
Yeah,
so
you have. And I'm sure that happens with people in any avenue of life, whether you're a musician or a really dedicated student, you start to sort of see your sense of self really bleed into those things that you're doing or those outcomes you're achieving. And I think, a big lesson definitely is trying to sort of cultivate your own sense of identity and sense of self, and really just sense of worth outside of those things, those external things you're trying to do or trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's so true. It would so suck to have your self-esteem with the performance of diving.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It'd be always so up and down.
It is. It's it certainly would be a very difficult thing if a panel of judges were the ones who determined how you feel about yourself all the time. So definitely a difficult line to walk in elite sport.
Yeah, And tell me about retirement. So how did you sort of decide, this was enough? It was probably after that really bad concussion. Huh?
It was. So I had exhausted my 4 years of athletic eligibility in college. So basically I went over on a scholarship and with the ability to compete for those 4 years, and I had sort of reached the end of that, and I had so many injuries and illnesses, and in particular quite a bad concussion right towards the end, and I think perhaps I could have kept diving if I had wanted to, but it likely wouldn't have been for my college either, so it would have sort of just been training over there if the coach had allowed me to keep training but not competing for them. So I think it just felt like the timing was right for making that decision.
Yeah, and how weird was it to suddenly stop something?
It was very, very odd. It's a long time now, but it still feels odd. Sometimes I wonder like how I did all the training and all the studies and managed all of it at once. But I think I'm grateful now for time I have to rest. So if something hurts, I don't have to push through it. I can stop.
Yeah.
And that's something I probably wouldn't have been aware of or as thankful for if I didn't have that background that I had.
Yeah, that's true. And so how do you fill your time? Now you're like, wow, I have so many hours in a day. What do I do? Like, did you find something to replace it, or?
Well, I think work is one thing that I've been doing. I finished college. I finished my master's degree sort of mid last year, and then moved back home, which took a little while because it was during COVID. So obviously navigating quarantine and then moving home. Very odd time to come back, but I had a little bit of a gap between when I moved home and then when I started this role. I started in January of this year, and so I just found myself with time on my hands that I wasn't used to and I hadn't ever had, so I ended up doing a certificate 4 in massage therapy. It was really enjoyable, and I met some great people and learned some good skills, so that was just a nice time for me where I could be a bit more social, see my family, and then just do something that I did simply because I enjoyed it. And then after starting this job this year, a lot of my time is filled with work, but also I'm really lucky now to have a lot more time to be with family and friends, and just really enjoying filling up some of my time with those social things that I wasn't always able to do when I was growing up because of the diving.
That's cool. And just wondering, in college, how did you decide to choose HR? I mean, it fits really nicely with what you're doing now, but how did you sort of decide HR out of everything to study?
I didn't go to college and immediately know that I would end up studying business or studying human resources. I had gone over and I was really keen to find a degree or find a program that I knew would be really practical and allow me to have something to do whenever I did finish the diving, but also something that would be recognised and would map to a qualification back here in Australia, as I knew I wanted to move home. So that made business a really good choice, and it was definitely something I was interested in. I especially liked the idea of there being an overlap between business and psychology, because I've always really enjoyed people and been very fascinated by that. So for me, I think human resources was a nice overlap of some interest and then also that practicality that I was looking for. And then I was really fortunate as well to have the director of my honours program. He had a human resources background and he was fantastic and certainly had a really huge impact in my development, and so through him I was able to learn a bit more about human resources, and it became more attractive as well as I just learned a little bit more firsthand about what his experience had been like.
Yeah, that's cool. And can you sort of describe what you currently do day to day at KPMG?
Okay, sure. So I'm in the Human Resources Advisory team, which is one of the teams in the corporate services group within our management consulting division. So a priority of our team is supporting HR transformation and then HR functional capability uplift. So really just helping HR professionals and HR functions within organisations to move the needle a little bit and try to get their organisations closer to what leading practice or best practice in human resources looks like. So it's really interesting work. I get to meet a lot of incredible people, and I've come in at a graduate level, so I've been so fortunate to have so many incredible colleagues and professionals around me that I know I'm learning so much from every day.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what kind of is the breakdown of your day? Would you say most of it is consumed in meetings or report writing or...?
It really depends on the engagement I'm working on, and then also sort of what my priorities are or what deliverables I have coming up. But I do spend a lot of time in meetings. A lot of the work I do can be fairly collaborative, and it's sort of a lot of brainstorming or working out complex problems or ideas together. So I really enjoy that aspect of being able to work closely with people. And then there is also, I would say, a fair bit of focus time as well, where I'm either doing my own research or trying to build my understanding of a concept, or building slides, building deliverables, whatever that might look like for the project I'm on. So it's usually quite a good mix of meeting with people, focus time and development time as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just a few more questions before we wrap up. So it might be sort of miscellaneous and random. So first one is, do you still dive recreationally now?
I don't. I haven't done any diving since I finished up in the US. So I'm not too sure if that's something that people do too often, just because diving is a little bit hard to kind of pick back up if you haven't done it for a while.
So dangerous, man.
Well, I definitely wouldn't be able to just, walk back onto a 10-metre platform and do a front 3.5 without any training or warm up. But
true.
So I don't, but I'm sure some people do and have.
Yeah. And also just wondering, after so much injury and especially after having a concussion, how does one get back on that platform? Surely there would be a lot of PTSD, right?
There's a lot of fear.
Yeah.
And it was helpful that I started so young, because I think when you're that young, you probably don't have the same fear. You don't necessarily realise how wrong things can go or how hurt you could end up being. So it helped that I had that really good foundation of skills when I was young and before that really came into play. As you get older and as you keep diving and keep learning harder skills, fear, I think, is a factor, and it does become a lot more prominent. But I think I also had to have a lot of trust in my coaches and the support staff who were working with me in that, they were telling me to do things because they knew I could do it, and we would take the precautions that we needed to do to ensure that I was being as safe as I could. So a lot of trust in the coaches and the staff, and then also just trust in yourself as well. It is a very mentally challenging sport. You're getting up onto a platform and you're executing a dive that only you can understand in your own head how that's going to feel and what you need to look for to be able to do it safely and do it well. So I think also just reminding myself that I do have muscle memory and I have done this before, or if not, I have the ability to do it, and you try to build your own self-confidence with that as well.
That's cool. And what are you sort of thinking when you're diving? What's the first, the 10 minutes before you step onto the platform, and during the dive, what is running through your mind?
So I always found it really helpful when I would try to take it just one dive at a time when I was competing. I think you've always got the dives that you're quite good at and you'll probably do well, and then you've got the dives that are a bit more hit or miss or a bit more inconsistent that you struggle with. And so it's very easy in a competition, for example, to go in and be so worried about, that dive that you have coming up next that you're not really being present or mindful or focused on what you actually have going on right now. So that's something I definitely learned, is trying to be present and to focus on what I was doing right then in that moment, and just to ground myself when I could. And you really can only take it one step at a time. So I think I would think about the key points that I knew I needed to do that one next dive well, and then in the air, just in terms of aerial awareness and knowing where you are. A lot of people, they have certain cues. For example, they count how many somersaults they've done, or they have either the water or some spot that they're looking at to help them track where they are and when they need to kick out. So once you're in the air, it goes very quickly, but you're really just thinking about or looking for those things, because you know if you see that, you need to kick out or you need to do whatever's next.
Yeah, that's cool. So the deep question, what do you think the meaning of life is in your opinion?
That's such a deep and really hard question. Oh, I'm not too sure. I mean, I think it's such a broad and philosophical question that the answer's probably going to be different to everyone.
Yeah, so
I think,
your opinion,
yeah,
this is a disclaimer, this is just Lara's
absolutely. I think for me, something that always brings me a lot of joy and a lot of happiness is connecting with others. So I think that's something that is a big focus for me now, making connections, enjoying other people's company, enjoying the fact that I get to know people and get to understand their unique and diverse experiences, and learn from everything that they've gone through and everything they're doing and will do. And then I also think just finding little ways throughout your day to get some enjoyment, because I think overall, you know, when you look back at your life, you're going to look back and think of those good moments and those happy moments and those things that made you smile, and hopefully I'll have lots of those, and if I have the chance to play a small part in making other people smile or making them happy too, I would love that as well.
Oh, that's beautiful. But Lara, so if you won the lottery tomorrow, what would you do differently about your life?
Oh my goodness, these are such deep questions. They're really good questions. They make you think, what would I do differently? I'm not too sure what I would do differently. I think I'm in a good spot at the moment where it has been a period of change, like starting work and also, you know, not diving anymore, but I'm surrounded by really amazing people in my personal life and my professional life. So I don't know that I would change anything that I'm doing right now, but I think if I could sort of help alleviate any kind of stresses that people close to me might be having, that's a great thing to do if you win the lottery. And then, you know, have some fun as well. I've been so lucky to travel all over the world with diving, but I suppose the unfortunate flip side of that is that I've seen a lot of airports, a lot of pools and a lot of hotels, and probably not done all the sightseeing and all the tourist attractions and things that you do if you just went over on a holiday. So it would be so fun if I could go back to some of those places, but just go for fun and for a holiday.
And stress-free.
Exactly.
Sounds good. And the final question is, what's an ideal day in the life for you? It can be work-related, it can be non-work related.
Okay. That's a good question too.
You're still an early bird, right?
Yeah, I do get up quite early. I think when I first finished diving, I definitely enjoyed sleeping in. It was such a novelty for me, to be honest. I was not used to it at all. And I had always sort of had that discipline in my life where, you know, because I had to get up so early for training, I would go to bed at a reasonable time, and then you don't have that structure, and you test it a little bit and enjoy staying up late or sleeping in where you can. Now I'm definitely more of an early riser again, just because I you know, I have work or things that I need to get to in the morning, which sort of gives you that discipline and that structure again. I think a perfect day, I wouldn't be in a rush.
Yeah.
Like I'd have time, and I'd spend time with my family and friends and partner, and just really enjoy their company.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So we're at the end of the podcast. Want to wave bye? Bye.
Bye.